All right. Well, I am truly excited about our next speaker. We're going to shift gears a little bit from talking about crypto policy and whatnot. But David, first of all, thank you for being here. I know you literally just got off a plane hours ago, and you're going to need to jet off again tonight. So
thank you very
busy
much
schedule.
for inviting me. Yep.
Thank you for the time. So we did announce some interesting and exciting news with the International Rescue Committee earlier today. But before we do this, let's do some level setting. David, you've obviously had a remarkable career in public service. You've held positions really at the highest level of government. You were a member of parliament in the UK, Secretary of State for the Environment, and also you were Foreign Secretary for a period of 3 years. But then about a decade ago, you pivoted a little bit and came to run the IRC. Could you tell us a little bit more about that decision and how that journey happened?
Well, you're very generous. You overlooked that I lost a couple of elections, which helped
Details.
helped me make some career choices. But the International Rescue Committee is a global humanitarian charity. It's a unique institution because it was founded by Albert Einstein in the 1930s to help rescue persecuted minorities, Jews, intellectuals from Nazi-occupied Europe. And today we're unusual because we're both an international humanitarian aid agency in Sudan, in Gaza, in Ukraine, but we're also a refugee resettlement and asylum support agency in 30 offices across the United States. We've got about 27,000 people who work for us around the world. We are now a $1.5 billion a year NGO, and we pride ourselves on being the evidence and impact leaders, the innovators of the humanitarian sector. And so although we're only 3% of the global humanitarian sector, we do 30% of the impact evaluations about what works and how to do better. And that's why we're proud of the partnership with you. We've got a global situation in which there are more resources to do more good than at any time in human history. And in a way, your industry is part of that. But despite the fact that there are more resources to do more good than at any time in human history, there are more people in need of humanitarian aid from organizations like us. There are more refugees, more coups, more internally displaced people. I've just come from the Mexico-Guatemala border yesterday. More people on the run from violence and persecution than at any time since records began. And that's the bridge that we've got to try and cross.
No, absolutely. And actually, on that point, I mean, you're in, I believe, 40 plus countries around the world providing amazing support and aid. And given that there's increasing number of crises, we almost, every day it's hard to see. How have you and the IRC evolved in terms of thinking about how to prioritize resources? You have finite resources. The needs are growing, and sometimes in areas where access to humanitarian aid is really challenged, like in the Sudan. So how do you deal with it? It seems overwhelming.
Yeah, I think there are two parts to that. First of all, you've got to make sure that you're not just chasing the money. The danger for an NGO, for a non-governmental organization, for a charity, is that you just chase the money and you lose sight of your mission. We have very clear entry and exit criteria for where we go. We're in parts of Ethiopia, we're in parts of Sudan, we're in Gaza, we're in places where there's the greatest need, but also where there isn't someone else doing the job already or doing it better. And we're quite strict on ourselves not to suffer from the kind of mission creep. We want the money that's looking to make impact to come after us rather than us just to be chasing any kind of money. And the second thing that I think is really important in this is that the kind of crises that we're responding to have changed.
Yes.
So emergency humanitarian aid sounds like it might be short term. But if I tell you that the average length of time a refugee is out of their own country in a refugee camp is 17 years, and so, and the minority of refugees are in camps, so that's a very limited sample, you can see that this is a multi-generational issue. So the old humanitarian model was keep people alive and then they'll go home. Now, fewer and fewer people are on the run from violence end up going home. So education, employment, livelihoods is very important alongside health, water and sanitation, basic levels of care. And so we're changing our model so that it's about information, it's about cash, as well as about the historic services that we've been charged with providing.
Right. So, I mean, kind of building that a little bit, you're global You just came from Mexico, Guatemala. I know you travel extensively. As you think about the most pressing priorities around the world, I'm sure they're different in different parts, but maybe I don't want to force you to take us on an entire world tour, but what are some of the highlights in terms of what the organization is seeing now? What are some of the most pressing needs where your services are most in demand?
Yeah, that's interesting. We have a data-driven approach to this. So every year we publish our emergency watch list in December, and that is a ranking of the 20 countries in greatest humanitarian need in the year ahead. Those 20 countries account for about 85% of the 300 million people in the world who are in humanitarian need. Yeah. So we've got a pretty good data-driven, quantitative as well as qualitative data. Sudan is the top, 20 million people in humanitarian need. Sudan is a country of 45 million people. Civil war started in April 2023. And you've got 20 million people who are dependent on organizations like ours. Yeah. If I tell you that 500,000 people have fled from Sudan to South Sudan, one of the poorest countries in the world, you can tell they must be desperate. Yeah. And these are people, I think it's important to give you a sense of this. When I went to the South Sudan border in February of this year, I met a woman, and her story was emblematic of the modern crises that we respond to. She was a hairdresser in Khartoum, which is the capital of Sudan. Her husband was a shoemaker, and her pride and joy was that her 2 kids were going to go to university in the year that was starting in September 2023. Instead, she trekked 700 miles to the border, and she was asking me, do you think I'll ever get out of here? And obviously, I didn't want to answer that. Maybe my previous career gave me experience in not answering questions, but that was a question where the dangerous answer would be one that sapped hope, really, or maybe even the fact-based answer would have sapped some hope. But I think that's an indication, that Sudan question is an indication of how conflict today is more and more within states rather than between states. In that sense, Ukraine and Gaza are rather outliers. What's happening in Ethiopia, that's our largest country program today. It's a $70 million program. There are 3 or 4 major conflicts within Ethiopia. That's what are called civil wars. In fact, they're uncivil wars. And the tools of diplomacy that I used to use in the Foreign Office are not well suited to resolving wars, conflicts within states. There are over 50 internal conflicts going on around the world at the moment. We'll have our new emergency watch list in December, but on the basis of what happened before, of last year's crisis list, Sudan was top, Gaza was second, Chad was in the top 5, Myanmar, formerly Burma, was at number 4. And so you've got a group of countries that are really the epicenter of conflict, but also they're the epicenter of the climate crisis. 16 of the top 20 countries on our watch list are in the most vulnerable quartile of climate disaster. And for them, it's not just an average rise in the global temperature. In the Western Sahel, the temperature's risen by more than 50% greater than the global average. But as many of you will know, the climate crisis is associated with more extreme weather events, not just with an average rise in temperature. So that overlap between conflict and crisis is an increasing driver for us, and that's why we're getting into 2 areas that might be interesting for you. One is anticipatory action. You think of emergency relief coming after the disaster. Right. Actually, the best form of cash support is before the disaster. And we've done a randomized control trial actually in northern Nigeria. If you give farmers money before the flood, they'll use it to protect their livelihoods. So we're trying to get into anticipatory action. Second thing that might be interesting for you is, I think we're used to, in, if you like, the industrialized world, we've had a debate for 15 or 20 years about how mitigating climate change, preventing climate change, can be a source of green jobs. You've got that in America with the Inflation Reduction Act. We've not really thought before, I don't think, or you don't see people talking about how adapting to climate change should also be a source of green jobs. Yeah. And actually in the places that we work, helping communities adapt to climate change, helping farmers with seed strengthening, with new information, for example, we work a lot in agricultural areas, that adaptation to climate change is actually a revenue raiser for them. It's a development opportunity, it's a livelihoods question. Yeah.
It's fascinating. I mean, and it's so complex. I'm curious, you've been with IRC for over a decade. you mentioned Sudan, Gaza, et cetera, et cetera. If we rewind 10 years, 8 years, how would that list look different, and what does that mean for your operations and how you have to approach?
Yeah, that's interesting. First of all, 10 years ago, we were a $400 million organization, and now we're a $1.5 billion organization. 10 years ago, there were probably 60 million refugees and internally displaced people in the world, and today there's 125 million. 10 years ago, I think the figure is that there were 80 million people in need of humanitarian need. Now there's 300 million. So the aggregates have changed. Now your question is, what's the internals? How have they changed?
Right.
Democratic Republic of Congo was top of our list. Things haven't got much better there, but they've got much worse elsewhere. Afghanistan was very high in our top 5 10 years ago. It's safer now. It's obviously oppressive in all sorts of ways, but we have 3,500 people, including 1,500 women, working for us in Afghanistan today. Relatively speaking, they're safer to do their jobs, but they're more oppressed as they try and do their jobs. So Afghanistan would have been very high, and obviously Ukraine would not have been on the list.
Right.
But Ukraine was in our top 10 last December.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, it just kind of points to the complexity and the need to adapt, and sort of kind of turning now to how the role of money plays into this and kind of loops into the things that we're going to start working on. As you provide support around the world, it's not a one-size-fits-all, I assume, right? I mean, depending on the type of crisis, whether it's a conflict or a natural disaster, there could be geopolitical differences or cultural differences from incident to instance. Can you give us an idea of what you consider the things you have to think about in terms of the scope of your response, and as you're delivering assistance, as you're delivering aid and wanting to do it in a way that's quick and secure and efficient, like what goes into that, and what do you have to keep top of mind?
Yeah, so 40 to 45% of our work is healthcare, broadly defined, from maternal health to water and sanitation to mental health. Another 15% is education. Another 15% is livelihoods. Another 15% is protection for vulnerable groups, women, huge levels of abuse of women in the places that we work, and also abuse of kids. So that gets you into the 90+ percentile. There's a residual on governance and rights for people. So that gives you a sense of the breadth. Now, there's no cookie cutter, or as I would say, biscuit cutter, but in every response, the first question we ask is, why not cash? Because what's the first thing that someone needs? Actually, cash support is the best place to start, because they may need medical services. Okay, that's specialist. They may need education services. That's specialist. But actually, body and soul depends significantly, and the fastest way to help people is through cash. Now, in some of the places we work, that is physical. That's literally banknotes. But obviously, that's a declining part of the work that we do. I asked yesterday, the people who are coming across the Guatemala-Mexico border, how many of them have a mobile phone? Everybody. Todo, I was told. Yeah. Everyone's got a mobile phone. So the potential for cash to be delivered in a personal way, in a safe way, is obviously much greater than before. Sure. And so the partnership, our approach is not to say, yes, we're for this kind of financial support rather than that. We'll say all the above. Because in different contexts, there'll be, Ukraine is different from the Central African Republic, and will have different modalities. But I think that one thing I would say is that the technology is vital for security and safety, but so is the staff member who goes and finds out, well, you're registering for a cash payment, and this is the first time you're registering, it's not the second time.
Right.
Secondly, you're in a vulnerable group, or are you in a vulnerable group? Thirdly, are you being preyed upon by someone who's going to take the money off you once it's sent to you? So it's more complicated than it sounds to get cash into an emergency, even when there's a market there that people could access. Certainly, from our perspective, including people who are on the run from violence in the market economy, is a first response of real power.
Yeah, absolutely. And sort of, I mean, It's interesting because, at the conference over the last few days, one topic that's been top of mind, it's top of mind in the industry, is around stablecoins, so digital representation of a fiat currency and the benefits that come along with that. As you think about all the logistical challenges of cash assistance, reflecting on what we've talked about, the ability for something to be traceable so that you know exactly where that cash is along the journey to get to where it needs to go. The fact that you avoid needing to use physical money, which of course comes with certain risk and challenges. And the ability for stablecoins, given the technology, to be movable very quickly and in bulk, feel like things that can help reduce some of the friction, some of the challenges that are inherent in trying to provide that cash assistance around the world.
I'm certainly not going to lecture this audience about things that you're much more expert than I am. From my perspective, we've got to be open-minded about this. Our research and innovation starts from the principle we've got to fast test, fast fail. We're proud of that. We're not scared of that. We've got to embrace the ideas of transparency, security. Those are good words for us that are helpful. Safety. Those have got potential for us. That's why we want to work with you. That's why we're, in a way, appealing to this audience to say, if you want to make an impact for people who are excluded in all sorts of ways from the blessings of the global market economy, reach out to us.
Yeah.
Because we're very much in the mode of opening minds to the way in which the humanitarian sector does its work. Because if we simply try and pedal faster on our old bicycle, we're not going to work.
Right.
We've got to find different ways of working. For example, we've now got a global architecture for information provision for displaced people. We help about 3.5 to 4 million people a year through our Signpost program. At the moment, and it's got 31 local instances, it's in 25 languages. We want to make it in 125 languages. We want to reach not 3.5, 4 million people. We want to reach 40 million people, 70 million people. We think that's possible. And who knows, you could hang a financial portal on that as well. Or you could be directing people to the way in which to access finance. So there's all sorts of ways in which we're discovering new ways of working, and we're proud of the fact that our innovation fund has a 40% failure rate. When I was in government, if you went to the House of Commons and said 40% of our work had failed, you'd get absolutely nailed.
Yeah.
But actually, from your own industry, you've got to be willing to take risk. 100%. And I think that the danger for our sector is that we're chasing our tail because the needs are growing, rather than stepping back and saying, well, hang on, how are we going to meet these needs in different ways?
No, and I think that's what's so exciting. I mean, we announced this morning, some of you may have heard, a partnership that we've entered into with IRC Ripple and IRC, where we're going to be exploring how we can use some of the technology that Ripple provides, both our payment solutions and the soon-to-be released RLUSD, the US dollar-based stablecoin, and learning really from each other. Our approach to our impact efforts has always been one of partnership, always wanting to form a relationship, knowing where you start isn't where you're going to end, and have an enduring sort of aspect to it, as opposed to we just have write a check, provide aid, and go on. So I think what's
just to say, if any of you want to write a check, that's fine. Although I'm British and so don't like talking about money, I've lived in New York for 10 years, so I'm now I've got over my hang-ups. But I picked two things out about the partnership that's important. First of all, it's multi-year.
Yes.
And that's important for us because our industry is incredibly short-term, and we need to make it more medium to longer term. I think that's really, really important. Secondly, we hope to inspire your employees and your partners by what we're doing. We think there's big scope for employees to say, well, at the end of the tax year, I want to be part of this movement as well because I care about people other than myself. And I think that's a really important part of this too.
I agree. I mean, the fact that it's multi-year, really speaks to this being a journey. And I think, well, what we do in our normal course of business at Ripple in terms of helping facilitate more efficient cross-border payments as an aspect of that, we're addressing pain points being it takes too long or it's a little more costly. I mean, what we're talking about here can be the matter of life and death, getting that assistance to the right place, to the appropriate people. And so, I think investing the time and effort to get it right is hugely important.
If you can make it work in some of the places that we work, you can make it work anywhere.
Right.
Because the threats are so great that actually it might be an interesting test bed for some of your ideas.
I agree. And I think we've always been of the mind at Ripple that at the core, I mean, our mission is we want to enable the internet of value. We want to move value around the world as quickly as data moves around the internet. And starting with our founders, even our Chris Larson, our chairman, the ability to have impact and address some of the challenges that prevent people from being part of the global economy was at the core of what motivated him to tackle these problems. So I think for us, while we've been proud and aggressive in our Ripple impact efforts, we're starting to see these intersections between the need. Obviously here with the IRC, we have programs with universities around the world. We work on sustainability, et cetera. And a lot of the technologies that Ripple is working on also can lend themselves to address some of the pain points you're facing. So I think that's a great intersection above and beyond the film fabric.
I don't want to be too political about this, but the truth is a lot of governments are in retreat from big global problems. They've got the idea that their electorates only want them to think locally. Now, in a world that's more interconnected globally than ever before, if governments are retreating from tackling big global problems, then it seems to me it's incumbent on businesses and NGOs to be the solution makers.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of NGOs that will advertise suffering, and there is real suffering. We're in the business of advertising solutions.
Yeah.
And we've got to be the solution makers that take away the excuse from the governments that they don't know what to do. From my point of view, we've got to be the pioneers of new ways of working, new solutions, and then we've got to challenge the governments, why aren't you supporting it?
Yeah.
In a way, we're de-risking for the governments, but in a world where they are very risk-averse, I think we've got a responsibility as well as an opportunity to be the solution makers.
No, which is great. I mean, that progressive thinking. I mean, again, I think a lot of commonality in the way we like to see the world. Is there anybody? I mean, as you say, a lot of governments are stepping away. Are there jurisdictions, areas where you are seeing positive signs, just in terms of governments that aren't kind of going in the wrong direction?
The German government have said that 5% of their humanitarian aid funding must be anticipatory action. In other words, in advance. That's pretty cool. Yeah. The Ugandan government say that every refugee who arrives gets a piece of land, gets cash support, gets access to services. That's pretty good. Yeah. So there are some good examples, but the truth is, the biggest leaps forward are not being found in government policy at the moment. They're being found in unusual partnerships in civil society, in business, especially at the interface between business and civil society, and that's what we want to try and push forward. I mean, the person I met yesterday on Monday in Mexico City, she said to me, just because I'm a migrant doesn't mean I can't have dreams. And when I came across your services, my dream of getting a job suddenly became possible. Yeah. And that's why I'm grateful to you. She came up to tell me that. So there are people out there, someone I met yesterday, he was a persecuted minority in Cuba who was a lawyer, and he's now not allowed to work in Mexico because his asylum case is still in the system. But he wants to be a productive contributor to society. These are solution makers too. The maths teacher from Cameroon who I met in Mexico City, who was kidnapped because he was an Anglophone and was kidnapped by a Francophone group. He's a refugee in Mexico. He wants to go back to teaching maths. These are solution makers that I think are inspiring, but they really need the help
100%.
Of the experts and of the financial resource that you represent. I know we've only got 35 seconds left. I almost said 35 minutes. Just if you'll permit me, if there are people in this audience who want to email me, it's david.miliband@rescue.org. we really want to try and take this partnership forward. I'm really grateful for the fact that you're willing to do it, and I hope we can really make it count.
Oh, we are tremendously excited as well, and we are running out of time. We're going to have to end it there. First of all, thank you, David, for taking the time, your travels,
Thank you very much.
and willing. And just a note for the rest of the group, after this, we are taking a quick break. Please be back at 3:35, and we will resume our programming. Thank you. Another hand for David, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hey, appreciate it. That was great.